Bob Litt joins me now from Washington. He is a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Bob, thank you so much for being with us. Special Counsel Mueller's words were carefully chosen. He emphasized that if the president clearly did not commit a crime, he and his team would have said so. Mueller also said charging a president with a crime was not an option he could consider. What did he clarify by making those points publicly?
Well, I think you're right that he chose his words on this very carefully, and although everything he said was contained in his report, I think what he chose to talk about was significant. And in this case, I think he was clearly trying to knock down the idea that his report found that there was no obstruction. He talked about the importance of obstruction of justice investigations to preserving the integrity of the investigative process, and he made such an emphatic point of saying that if they had been able to clear the president, they would have done so, and that the only reason they did not reach a decision on whether he committed a crime was the fact that, as he put it, it was not an option because of the Department of Justice policy.
Well, Robert Mueller has been silent since the beginning of the Russia investigation. Why do you think that he decided to make a public statement now? And how does his approach differ from other special counsels investigating previous administrations?
Well, look, I've said before that Bob Mueller is one of my heroes, and I have to put that out front. I think he's always been an exemplary public servant, and I think this reflects his approach to what he thinks a prosecutor ought to be, which is somebody who does a dispassionate and apolitical investigation, who doesn't seek to garner headlines for himself, and who makes a decision at the end of it and then lets that decision stand for itself. Why he spoke out now, I think it's because it's his last day in office, and he wanted to make the record clear as to what he thought was important. You didn't ask, but I think it's also equally important that he laid such emphasis on what he considered to be the very, very serious nature of what the Russians did in this case, and ended with essentially a plea for action to be taken to prevent this from happening again.
Right. He said it should be the concern of every American. Mueller said that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing. Some Democrats are pointing to impeachment, but House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is calling for caution. Let's listen to what she had to say Wednesday afternoon.
Many constituents want to impeach the president, but we want to do what is right and what gets results.
So do you agree with Robert Mueller, or could he have reached a definitive conclusion on obstruction without having to draw up an indictment?
No, I think his approach was exactly right in this case. I think that he correctly concluded that he was not allowed to make a decision on this issue, that his job was to investigate and preserve the evidence, because after all, if President Trump is defeated and leaves office in 2020, a new attorney general will have the right to determine whether or not to bring a prosecution at that point. And I think he was also correct in saying that while the president is still in office, it's up to Congress to determine whether there are any consequences from the conduct that Mueller set forth in his report.
Well, Mueller did not take questions Wednesday. He didn't necessarily refuse to testify before Congress, but said he expects this would be the only time he speaks publicly about the Russia report. Let's listen to what he said.
There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report. It contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself. And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress.
So does that mean Congress will have to subpoena Robert Mueller to testify, and will they be successful?
I think what he's saying is, you can ask me to come and testify, but don't expect me to say anything beyond what's within the four corners of my report. I think it's interesting in that regard that he is, according to press reports, still insisting that his testimony take place in private. Which is a little difficult to understand if what he's saying is, I'm only going to say what we've said publicly. And I think that just reflects his very strong desire that he and his report not become politicized, that he's throwing it over to Congress and say, you take it from here, you do the investigative work if you think this needs to be followed up. Don't expect me to step into the political fray.
Interesting. Well, last week, the president gave Attorney General William Barr the authority to investigate the origins of the Russia probe. Considering what Robert Mueller said on Wednesday, how do you see that actually playing out?
Well, I think it's interesting that Mueller made a point, I think, of emphasizing, number one, that there was a legitimate basis for an investigation that indeed had to be pursued, and number two, he made a point of complimenting the excellence and integrity of his team. So I think he was laying down a marker there that he believes that everything that was done here was appropriate and indeed necessary for protecting the nation. I think that it's appropriate for Attorney General Barr to look at whether there should be changes in policy from what the existing policy is. But the question is how to ensure that that's done in a fair manner without prejudging the conclusions, as Attorney General Barr, unfortunately, seems to have indicated that he's done already.
All right, Bob Litt in Washington for us. Bob, thank you.
Thanks for having me.